What we're going to dive into in this hour experiential immersion is going to be looking at how pathways to planetary health involve three things. We're going to look at mind and what that is, the self, what that might be considered to be, and this related process called consciousness. And the first thing I'll just invite you to consider for our time right now is that what you do individually with the body you have, either sitting on the cushion or sitting in the chair or sitting on the floor, that body you were born into has something that you might call a mind. Any of you feel you have a mind? Let's just see. Seriously, anyone, would you say, even if you don't know how to define it, how many would say you have a mind? Okay, great. So you have a mind, and within that mind experience, we have this thing that we say, well, I have a self. You know, some people would say, well, it's this body that was born, and then I would say, well, how do you know you have a mind or a self? And then you'd say, well, I'm conscious of that. I have a sense of knowing. So tonight what we're going to do is look at, number one, how the human mind may be very much related to what's happening on the planet. That the climate crisis, when you look at it from a deep scientific view, is actually the product of the human mind. So then understanding the mind might be helpful if we're going to try to, in a sense, reverse engineer the difficulties we've gotten ourselves into. You might also look at how the sense of self that modern human beings have has also contributed to what's going on with degenerative kind of economies and degenerative ways that we live instead of regenerative. And so we want to know about that self, and we're going to use tonight an exploration of consciousness to explore some of those things, number one. So that's the general topic of our gathering in these 3 days. But the other outcome I hope can happen from this hour is that it will give you a basic science of how to actually keep your mind healthy. That with the challenges that we have today, and the challenges that are just going to get even more robust in the weeks and months and few years ahead even, that all of us in this room who are devoting our lives to trying to improve the health of the planet need to make sure we start with ourselves. It's kind of like when you're on an airplane and they say, you know, if there's a loss of cabin pressure, put on your oxygen mask first, so that if we don't know how to care for ourselves with the stressors that are going to increase, then things are going to only be more challenging and be more difficult to deal with. So actually, this is a personal training that we're going to go through. So let me just check out with you, how many of you have a regular reflective practice of some sort that you do to keep your mind strong and healthy? Raise your hand really, really high. So that's the vast majority of people. Great. So you're already doing that. And I know I've talked to a few people who don't have a reflective practice. You may do other things. Go for a walk in nature. But we'll look at some of the science of that. So that's what we're going to talk about. So these are some of the questions we're going to deal with. What is the mind? What is the self? And then, of course, we can say, what's a healthy mind? What's a healthy self? And then we're going to say, what in the world can you do to shape well-being using awareness? And then how does any of this relate to creating a healthier world, to creating planetary health? The classic way for 2,500 years people have thought about the mind is it's just the same as brain activity, and we're not going to spend a lot of time saying why that's a limited view, but it's not only a limited view, even though it's the vast majority of academics in my field in psychiatry. I'm also trained in psychological research and psychology, in neuroscience. That's the standard line. Your feelings, your thoughts, as Hippocrates said 2,500 years ago, they're just an outcome of your brain. This graph helps us see that the mind is not just inside your head. It's fully embodied, and it's also, we're going to see soon, fully relational. However, research shows that what your parents tell you, what school tells you, what your peers tell you, what media tells you, and what the larger culture tells you actually shapes what you believe yourself is. It's called self-construal. And if the self is construed to be just inside your body and you're just a solo self, it can lead to all sorts of potential negative outcomes, as we'll soon see. So instead, we're going to look at how these facets of the mind, things you probably know about your subjective experience. So we'll do an exercise in just a few moments to dive into your subjective experience. And how do you know you have a feeling or a thought? Well, you know because you have awareness, and some of you do practices to cultivate that. That's sometimes called consciousness. You also have something called information processing. So on your computer or your smartphone, you can have extended ways cognition or information processing is beyond the skin of your body. And there's also a process called self-organization. When you look at this as from a mathematical point of view, complex systems have something called self-organization, an innate, what's called emergent property that regulates their own becoming. And that, again, is why often this kind of talk would take 3 days to do, but we're going to just do it in 1 hour. And we'll see that this self-organizing facet can be defined this way: an embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information is one facet of the mind. Now, where is that process? It's both within your body, and because skull and skin don't block the passage of energy and information flow, it's happening now among us right now. So there's a relational facet of mind, and there's an embodied facet. Now, you might say, well, skull and skin are kind of irrelevant, and that's actually the point. But if you live in a culture like many modern cultures, what some people would call Western cultures, but I once said this to His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and he said, don't call them Western cultures, because it's just as much in the East now, so don't be biased like that. So you'll never hear me say Western culture. My 15-year-old son was there, and he jabbed me in the ribs and said, the Dalai Lama got you, didn't he? So I don't say Western cultures. Modern culture is a safer way to say that, can make you believe that yourself is just inside this body. And if you want to, in the Q&A, we can talk about how we understand the brain correlates of that. But the idea here is that mind is a fully relational process. Many of you described in talking about your relationality, some shift from feeling like you were in your body to feeling at one with nature. And that was such a common process in not only our discussions, but in the meditation you're about to do, that we want to have an understanding of that, which we'll talk about after we do the meditation. So once you say something is a self-organizing process, it turns out that mathematics of self-organization tells us that it's like a river. And the optimal flow of this river is called maximizing complexity, which basically means harmony. It means being flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable, which as a psychiatrist was an amazing thing to read in a math book, because it basically is the best description of mental health, or health of anything, you'll find. So optimal self-organization comes from a really simple process. The system differentiates, allows things to be different or specialized or unique, like all of us being able to differentiate and say, here's my biography. So we're differentiating from one another. We all listen intently, and in the listening is the connection part, the linkage, the joining, the connecting. And the important thing about this process we're going to call integration is that in the linkage, you do not lose the differentiation. So it's not like, as Jonathan mentioned the other day, it is not like a smoothie. You're not going into a blender. This isn't about homogenization. Integration is you retain the differentiated components. We haven't lost our individuality here, but hopefully in the course of these 3 days on the pathways to planetary health, there is a sense of joining that happens and having the differences among all of us, our skill sets, our interests, our backgrounds, honored, and then we become an integrated whole. So that has this quality that if you looked at it like a river, it would be this flow. And what's fascinating about that flow is on one bank is chaos and the other bank is rigidity. So when a system is not integrated, instead of having that harmonious flow, it's actually leading to either chaos or rigidity or both, which for a psychiatrist, it explains the entire system of mental disorders. And it turns out that now, after 25 years of having proposed that, I had 18 interns work with me to revise this textbook with this in the Developing Mind into its 3rd edition. Every study ever done on any condition in psychiatry of the brain has always, without an exception so far, had impaired integration in the brain. And amazingly, in 2015, a study came out showing that if you look at every measure of well-being, the one brain correlate of every measure of well-being they could find was how integrated your brain was. And interventions like psychotherapy and interventions which we can now study, but especially interventions like mindfulness meditation, along with compassion meditation, increase the growth of integration in the brain. It's quite amazing, actually. So with my patients years ago, I said, well, if that hypothesis is true from the 90s, that integration is the basis of health, whether the health is of the individual or a romantic couple or a family or a classroom or a school or an organization or a city or a state or a country or maybe even a planet, that when any of those systems of human beings participating, but actually of anything that's a complex system, when things are not being honored for their differences, like with racism or misogyny, and you see the chaos or rigidity that come out of that, that's impaired integration. Or humanity on this planet is excessively differentiated without honoring other species of living beings. So it's impaired integration, leading to the chaos or rigidity on the planet. So for me, if that's true, integration is health, and I'm seeing an individual client in therapy, what I said, well, every form of therapy, when you look across all of them, and this is a field I work in called interpersonal neurobiology, where we bring all the sciences together from math to anthropology and all in between, and say if there was one framework to look at reality with all the different disciplines of science, could you come up with an approach to helping people in education or parenting or therapy or whatever? So in therapy, there's a table in my office that looks like this. It has a central glass part and an outer wooden rim. So I said to my patients, let's integrate consciousness, because consciousness appears to be a part of every psychotherapy model, which is just interesting. And integration appears to be the base of health. So I said, what if we integrated consciousness? Now, what that would require is for you to know what consciousness could be defined as, its components, and then differentiating them and linking them. So what we did around the table was we put the knowing of consciousness in the center of this table as a metaphor. We put the knowns of consciousness on the rim, and you could divide them into these, does this red thing work? Let's see. You could divide them into these 4 parts. You've got the first 5 senses here in the first segment of the table's rim. You have the senses of the body here in the second segment, like the feelings of the heart or the intestines or the muscles. You have mental activities, and I'll be walking you through this entire thing, like emotions or memories or thoughts. And then you even have your sense of connection to other people and the planet here in the 4th segment. And there's a singular spoke of attention, so when we're going to move the spoke around, let's say you're paying attention to hearing at first, which is basically sound waves. We'll then we'll let go of hearing, move over to sight. So then when you move from sight to smell, you're letting go of the prior thing in the exercise. And then there'll come a time in the practice when you'll not only move the spoke all around, but then I'll invite you, if you're up for it, to doing this move, which is to bend the spoke around and aim it into the hub of knowing, of awareness. And that's the practice we're going to do right now. I've done this now. I did it at first with my patients, then my students did it with their therapists. They did it with themselves and their patients, and people started getting better from all sorts of things. And then I started doing the workshops. I did it with the first 10,000 people in rooms like this, not only like this, in this room. And I would record the results, because I'm a scientist, I want to know. And now I've done it with over 50,000 people in rooms like this. And now I don't bother recording it because the results are virtually always the same, no matter what country I'm in, no matter a person's meditation history, no meditation history, educational background, professional background, religion, gender, age, it doesn't matter. The results, everyone, of course, is unique, but the results are incredibly similar when you do it with that many people. And we'll talk about those results, but first we'll talk about your results. So any questions about the practice we're about to do? No? Okay. So what I'm going to ask you to do, since most people have a meditation practice, we're going to do just extremely brief breath practice, just for the few that don't. If you were teaching this to someone who's never meditated before, you would want to do a really simple practice first, like a breath practice, and then introduce them to it later. But since we're all experienced, we're going to just jump right in. So here's a couple of simple statements I want to make. This is often not said, but if you were beginners, for sure, a very important statement to say is you're about to explore your mind. For some people who've never done it before, you have, most of you have. If you've never done it before, sometimes you realize it's really hard to do that, and that's okay. So this isn't going to be easy. This is not a relaxation technique. The kind of practice we're about to do, you may feel relaxed, you may not feel relaxed. The other thing is, for some people, when they go inward and take time in, stuff comes up that sometimes can be frightening. So if that happens, don't worry about it. That's something that's just a red flag that says, oh, there's something in me that I need to work on later on. And if you do have that happen, whatever we're focusing on, like for some people, it's the breath. When they focus on the breath, the vast majority of people find that really relaxing. Other people can get really freaked out. Like I once worked with someone who was in a near drowning accident, and I didn't even realize that that had been the case. And when he was doing the breath thing, of course, he had a panic attack because he was bringing back memories of the drowning. So you need to honor your particular body's response. And if we're on some particular areas, we go around the wheel, and it's really agitating to you, just move to either your fingertips or your toes, or if the breath is comforting for you, go to the breath. And that's fine. If you want to talk to me about it afterwards, I'm available to you. Any questions about that? Okay, so just really respect whatever your experience is. Just because 90% of people find something comforting and you don't, doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It just means you're having an experience, and that's all. That's all it means. The other thing to say is that, especially this time of day, you may get sleepy, so you don't need to do this practice with your eyes closed. It's more likely you're going to fall asleep. If you do lie down, that's fine, but I would put an arm straight up like this so that if you do fall asleep, your arm will fall down and wake you up. That's a very useful technique. And in a group like this, there's one thing we need to do collectively, which is if you do find it's a great time to take a nap, naps are like the most underrated human activity. However, you won't have any idea what we're talking about afterwards. You can always do this from my website. You know, we give it away for free, and people have been doing it from the website. However, if you start to snore, it's really, really hard to ignore a snore. So right now, turn to your neighbors and give them permission to gently, loving you, wake you up if you're snoring. Go ahead, please. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do it if you start snoring. That'll keep you awake. I don't want to snore. I don't want to snore. Okay. The other thing just to say is that you don't need to have a visual memory. Like if I close my eyes, I can't see that wheel. Other people can. So if your eyes are closed and you don't see the wheel on the slide, which is fine, it's just the idea of the wheel. And I've taught this, and we teach this to kindergarten kids, and they get it like this. Not as a meditation, but as just an image of the wheel or an idea of a wheel. And the idea is very simple. The hub of the wheel is the sense of being aware. The rim of the wheel is what you're aware of. I'm going to walk you through everything, so you don't have to memorize anything. but that's the simple idea. Single spoke of attention, okay? All righty. Yes, good question. The exercise is 5 hours long. No, it's
I want to know whether I want to lay down.
It's 23 minutes.
Okay.
Maybe it'll be 23 and a half. Yes, is that okay?
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? Those are good questions. Okay, so let's begin very simply by letting your eyesight allow your visual attention to come to the middle of the room. And now send your visual attention behind me to the wall behind me. And now bring your attention back to the middle of the room. And now to about book reading distance, as if you had a book or magazine in your hands. And just notice how you can determine where attention goes. And for this first part of the practice, let's begin with the breath. And let attention go to the breath. And let's begin at the nostrils. So if it's comfortable for you, and if not, just go to your fingertips. But if it's comfortable for you, just let the sensation of the air coming in and out of the nostrils be the focus of attention. And just let awareness be filled with the sensation of the breath in and out. And now let attention go from the nostrils to the chest, where the rising and falling of the chest is the focus of attention. And let that sensation of the chest rising and falling fill awareness. And now bringing attention to the abdomen. And if you've never done belly breathing, put a hand on the abdomen. And notice when the air fills the lungs, the abdomen actually moves outward because the diaphragm is actually pulling down. And then as the air escapes the lungs, the abdomen moves inward. So let this outward and inward movement of the abdomen be where you place the focus of attention. And just let the sensation of the abdominal movement fill awareness as it goes out and in. And now just choose however you sense the breath most naturally. It may be the abdomen moving out and in, chest rising and falling, the air at the nostrils going in and out. For some people, it's just the whole body just breathing. Doesn't matter, but pick a way that you feel the breath, you sense the breath. Not thinking about the breath or observing the breath, but actually sensing the body breathing. And once you've chosen that way, let's just do a brief moment now just of sensing the breath. And the exercise is quite simple, and you're probably familiar with it. It goes like this. Your task is to sense the breath, in and out, in and out. And when a distraction, like a thought about dinner or tomorrow's meeting or whatever, a distraction takes you away from the breath, when you notice that you're no longer on the breath, lovingly and gently let the distraction go and return the focus of attention to the breath. And let's begin that breath practice right now. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath, we'll let this simple breath practice go, knowing you can always come back to it at any time. It does some amazing things to actually balance different aspects of the nervous system, just focusing on the breath like that. So now we're going to move from the breath practice, just a preliminary practice, just to get us warmed up, to the wheel of awareness practice. And if you do choose to do this again, you don't need to start with the breath. You can just start straight on with the wheel, listening to it on the website, or just memorizing it and doing it on your own. And we'll begin again by sensing the breath, just to get us grounded, in and out. And then letting the breath go, and imagine either the idea or the image of the wheel. Remembering now that the hub of this wheel, the center of the wheel, represents the knowing of consciousness, of being aware. The rim represents anything we can be aware of. And we have a singular spoke of attention, which is how we direct our focus to include whatever we're going to be on. And let's begin with the first of 4 segments. And this first segment of the rim is the segment that includes the first 5 senses. And let's begin with hearing, letting sound fill awareness. And now imagine moving the spoke over from hearing, the sense of sound, to sight, letting eyelids open gently if you'd like, or just letting the light come through the eyelids. Let the focus of attention being on light, and let light fill awareness. Now imagine moving the spoke over, this time to the sense of smell, letting aromas fill awareness. And now moving the spoke over to the sense of taste. So again, letting all the other senses go as we then move to taste, letting tastes fill awareness. And now moving the spoke over one more time on this first segment to the sense of touch. Anywhere where skin is touching clothing, the floor, skin touching skin, hand in hand, let the sense of touch fill awareness. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath and letting it go. And imagine moving the spoke over now to the second segment of the rim. So now we go from these energy flows from outside the body of smell and touch and taste and all that. And now we're moving to the interior of the body. So again, we're going to now sense the sensations of muscles and bones and organs. And let's begin with the facial region, letting the sensations of the muscles and bones of the face fill awareness. And then to the top of the scalp, the back of the scalp, the side of the scalp, the ears, and the sensations of the muscles and bones of the throat and neck. the shoulders. And then streaming attention down both arms to the ends of the fingers. And now bringing attention to the upper back and the chest. And then the lower back and the muscles of the abdomen. And then to the hips. And then streaming attention down both legs to the ends of the toes. And now bringing attention to the pelvic region. And then opening to the sensations of the genitals. And now bringing attention to the interior of the abdomen with the intestines, deep in the intestines, with the lower intestines. And then following those gut sensations up through the inside of the abdomen to the top of the abdomen where the stomach rests, slightly to the left. And then opening to the sensations that go from the stomach up through the esophagus, the tube connecting the stomach and the intestine, all the way from the abdomen through the chest, up and up to the interior of the throat and the inside of the mouth. And now moving from these digestive system sensations now to the respiratory system, focusing behind the cheekbones with the sinuses. Then the back of the nose, inside of the mouth, and then down the front of the throat where the trachea is the tube that brings life-giving air down inside the chest as the lungs on the left and right expand and contract. And now centering attention in the heart region, inside the chest, slightly to the left. And now opening awareness to any sensation from the body, from head to toe, muscles, bones, organs. Any sensation, let it just fill awareness. Many things may come or nothing may come. Whatever happens, just happens. Welcome anything in. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath, we'll let these interior sensations of the body go, knowing we can always return to this deep source of what wisdom traditions have always taught is a source of intuition and wisdom, and now science is affirming what those practices have taught for many, many generations. Being open to the signals of the body is a deep source, important source of knowing. And now imagine with that spoke now moving over to the third segment of the rim. And this is the segment that represents mental life, things like emotions, thoughts, memories, hopes, dreams, longings, desires, beliefs. All of this and more we'll just call mental activities here on the third segment of the rim. So with the spoke to this segment, we're going to do something a little differently than the focused attention we've done on the first two segments. You know, we did hearing and seeing, etc. That was doing one thing at a time. Now we're going to move from focused attention like that to something that's simply called open awareness. And we'll stay with the spoke at the third segment. And from the hub of knowing of the wheel of awareness, with the spoke out to the third segment of mental life, we'll do this in two parts. The first part is to simply invite anything in, any thought, emotion, memory, hope, longing, anything. Just rest in the hub, spoke out at the rim, and just a kind of bring it on attitude, like come on in, like the Rumi poem, The Guest House, invite anything in. And from the hub, this spacious hub of knowing, just let's see what comes in. Nothing at all may come. Lots of things may come. One thing may come at a time. There's no right, there's no wrong, there's just experience. So resting in the hub, let's begin this open awareness practice of inviting anything to come in from mental life. And for the second part of this open awareness practice, again, inviting anything in, this time I invite you to pay particularly close attention to the characteristics with which a mental activity, let's use as an example a thought, the characteristics of how that mental activity, that thought, first presents to awareness, stays present, and then leaves awareness. So from the hub of the wheel, you're going to be studying that thought. How did it get into awareness? Was it subtle? Was it really abrupt and presenting itself in a big way? Did it come from one place to the other? Then, once you've sensed from the hub, this thought has arisen in awareness, how does it stay there? Does it vibrate? Is it like oscillating? Is it coming and going? Is it solid? What's the quality, the characteristics with which it stays there in awareness? And then, this thought, how does it leave? Does it disintegrate? Does it break into pieces suddenly? Does it slowly disintegrate, slowly go away? Or is it just replaced by like another mental activity, like another thought or a memory or an emotion or something? In other words, how does it leave awareness? So here you're going to study the architecture of mental life, studying how a mental event, like a thought or an emotion or something, memory, how does it first present, stay present, and then leave awareness? And let's begin that practice right now. Now I invite you once again to find your breath and ride the wave of the breath in and out. And before we move the spoke over to the fourth and final segment of our relational sense, our sense of interconnection with people and the world, if you're up for this more advanced step, it's not particularly, a simple one, but it's pretty straightforward. Just nod your head so I can see if you would like to try it. Okay, so most people are nodding their head. If you're not up for it, that's totally fine. This is a more advanced step, so you can just focus on the breath or do just on your fingers or whatever feels comfortable for you. If you are up for doing it, let me tell you the instructions for this part. This is the part where we're going to explore the hub itself. And the visual metaphor is simple. It's to send the spoke out, spoke of attention out, but instead of going to the rim, imagine the idea, or if you can image it yourself, bending the spoke around into the hub itself. So you're going to focus attention into the knowing of awareness. Now, some people love that image, bending the spoke around. Other people prefer the following images instead. They prefer to send the spoke out and retract it. They don't like bending it. Other people don't want to retract it. They want to leave the spoke in the hub. And other people even prefer just having no spoke, just dropping it to the hub. All are fine. There's no right, there's no wrong. I actually do it different. I do this every morning. Different mornings, I try it different ways, and sometimes some image works, sometimes the others work. So you can try it, and the idea is to rest in pure awareness. The hub is the knowing of awareness. And whether you're bending the spoke, retracting it, keeping it in the hub, or having no spoke at all, the invitation is to drop into awareness itself. Some people would say, become aware of awareness. Other people would say, rest in awareness. Other people would say, pure awareness. Whatever words, it doesn't matter. You're going to have the experience, whatever it is. And let's begin that practice of just dropping into the hub of resting in awareness right now. Now I invite you once again to find the breath and then ride the wave of the breath in and out. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath, and then imagining now straightening that spoke out or sending that spoke out to the fourth and final segment of the rim. And this is the segment that represents our relational sense of interconnection, our sense of connection to people, to the planet. And let's begin by just opening to the feeling, the sensation of the connection to the individuals who are physically right next to you here in the sanctuary, here in this room, right here and now. Just open to the sensation of those closest to you in this room physically. And then expanding that sense of connection further to include all of us here in the sanctuary, in this Pathways to Planetary Health community we've created, to all of us here doing the Wheel of Awareness tonight. And then opening to the sensation of connection to family and friends not inside these beautiful walls, to family and friends outside of this hall. And then expanding that sense of connection to include the people with whom we work, to the people who live in our neighborhoods and communities, our towns, our cities. Opening to a sense of connection to people who live in our territories or provinces, to our states. Opening that sense of connection even further to include all people who live in our nation. And then widening that sense of connection to all members of our human family, to all human beings who share our common home, this precious and fragile planet, this place we've named Earth. And then widening that sense of connection to include all living beings on Earth, all animals and plants and fungi and all living beings, and to all the ecosystem, the water, the rocks, the sky, to all of nature. And knowing that wisdom traditions have taught what now science is affirming is an incredibly positive influence on our own well-being and the well-being of those around us. If you're up for it, I'm going to give you these science-affirmed phrases that when you say them silently in your inner mind, amazingly, all sorts of fantastic and documented things happen that I'll tell you about later on. But just the notion that you can make these verbal statements inside that are really representing intention of kindness and compassion. I'll say a phrase, I'll pause, and then in your inner voice you can repeat the phrase. And they go like this. May all living beings be happy. And then silently in your inner voice you repeat, may all living beings be happy. May all living beings be as healthy as they can. May all living beings be safe. And may all living beings flourish and thrive. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath, we'll now send those same wishes in a little bit of an elaborated form out to an inner sense of our identity. Sometimes we use the word me or I for this inner identity we have. And these phrases go like this: may I be happy and live with meaning, connection, and equanimity, and a playful, grateful, and joyful heart. May I be as healthy as I can and live with a body that gives energy and flexibility, strength and stability. May I be safe and protected from all sorts of inner and outer harm. And may I flourish and thrive and live with the ease of well-being. And now, taking a bit of a deeper breath, we're going to send one more set of elaborated wishes out to an integrated identity. So if I or me is the inner identity we have, we're not just an embodied entity, we are also a relational process. We are a we, an us, in addition to an I and me. But to integrate, we need to honor differences, but retain those differences while we establish linkage. So it isn't just me to we, it's me plus we equals mwe, M-W-E, would be an integrated identity. So let's send these same elaborated wishes out to mwas. And these wishes go like this. May we be happy and live with meaning, connection, and equanimity, and a playful, grateful, and joyful heart. May we be as healthy as we can and live with bodies that give energy and flexibility, strength and stability. May we be safe and protected from all sorts of inner and outer harm. And may we flourish and thrive and live with the ease of well-being. And now once again, finding the breath and riding the wave of the breath in and out. And now taking a bit of a deeper breath as we let this wheel of awareness practice come to a close for now. If your eyes are closed, you can let them get ready to come open. And we'll have a short discussion and conclude our evening presentation before we go for music. Welcome back. Thank you for going on the journey. So, what I'm going to do is do a very brief overview of the 10,000 person survey, and then ask you to consider, do we understand in any kind of way how a practice like this might just support all the work we're doing personally, so it maintains your resilience, or planetarily, so it actually shifts the nature of modern culture's way of viewing identity. So let's take a quick dive through this. We're going to look at a quick overview of the 10,000 person survey. The things that I mentioned earlier were amazing. It didn't matter a person's background. It didn't matter if they'd meditated before. I can do this in another country, and it isn't just an American thing. I did this in a parliament once in another country, and a parliamentarian came up to me and said, I didn't want to share during the sharing time. And he was very serious and took me aside during the snack time. I said, why, you didn't want to share? He goes, no, I wouldn't share. I said, well, why not? And he looks at me and he goes, you know that part when I bend the spoke around? And I said, yeah, I'm familiar with that part. And he goes, and now he's crying. And he goes, I have never felt so much love before in my life. I have never felt so connected to everyone and everything. And then he goes on to say he didn't want to share that with his fellow policymakers because he thought they would think he was weak. So then we had a discussion about, does he leave love out of policy formation? One person once said that they have never felt so much a realization that they are the birds, they are the water, they are the rocks when they went into the hub. This happens every workshop I do. It's like my students who come with me to the different workshops say, no one's going to believe that this happens every time we go to do a workshop. I said, that's why I have the recorder on, so they can see it. These are the things people say about the hub itself. So what we're doing now is we're saying, we're going to focus on why do people, when they do this wheel of awareness practice, without any kind of preliminary anything, say these things about what that hub is like. Why do they say clarity, joy, empty yet full is a phrase that comes up over and over again. Expansive, infinite, eternity, God, love, peace, sense of belonging, a fundamental part of the whole, connected to others, the world, the universe, and timelessness. So I'm a scientist. I'm also a clinician. This, to me, is incredibly fascinating. What is the hub? Well, we said it's the knowing of awareness. Okay, well, what's that? So no one has an answer for that. So the fact you're not answering, you're with everybody else on the planet. I'm going to give you a possible answer. You ready? What we're about to do is say, is there any branch of science that correlates with, that's all we're going to use that word, those findings? Now, the usual thing you would do, and this is what I did do, is go to all the studies of brain science, and there is nothing at this moment in neuroscience that helps explain those words. So the subjective experience that's translated into linguistic symbols of those words in the 10,000 person survey, but it's happened with 50,000 people now, doesn't correlate with anything that I can find in brain science. That doesn't mean the brain's not involved, it just means nothing's jumping out of neuroscience that says, oh yeah, that fits. So that's intriguing. So is there a branch of science that would correlate with that? Well, what did we say the mind was? Does anyone remember what we said it was? It was so fast. We said that the mind was happening both within your body, including its brain in the head, and it was happening between. So what could be within and between is actually something that people in the field of mental health don't usually talk about. In fact, if you talk about it, you're made fun of, but it's energy. Everything that happens in the body is energy, and everything that happens in our relationality is energy. When energy is just pure, like that, it's just pure energy. But if I say New York, that's energy that's in formation to symbolize something, so we call it information. So information is a pattern of energy with symbolic value. It means something other than itself, and you can also have pure energy. So you can be a conduit, like a hose, or you can be a constructor, like constructing a sense of self is a mental construction of energy. Okay, that's a whole book called Mind. You can read all about that, but let's get on to it. So if it's energy, here's the next question. Now, Marcello and I were talking about this earlier. What is energy? So A common statement from physicists would be, well, it's the capacity to do stuff. Kinetic energy, motion of things, electrical energy, things like this, potential energy. However, if you hang out with 150 physicists, many of them are quantum physicists, that's actually not what they say. They say something absolutely weird, which is, and this is just, this is what they say, and this is what I got to do for a week with 150 physicists and myself. This is what they said over and over again. Energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. So I took out a piece of paper and ultimately graphed it. And with the quantum physicists that I work with, they're super excited, like Arthur Zions, who's the former president of the Mind and Life organization, is thrilled with what I'm about to show you. And so if you map out what the physics view is of energy, it looks like this. So let me give you an example. Right now, if I'm thinking about a word and you and I share 1 million words, and we're now going to talk about probability. So we're now in a sea of possibility, right? You don't know which word I said. It could be 1 out of 1 million, right? So right now, on this graph, if this is a probability curve, the bottom is where it's near 0. 1 out of 1 million is close to 0. The top will be 100%. And then once I say ocean, where do you think the next point will be if we're describing energy as the space between possibility and actuality? Where will it be? If I say ocean, how many of you know what's the percentage? What's the probability that you know I said ocean once I said ocean? 100%. There it is. Good. Now, what if I'm only going to pick one of the 5 oceans in the world? Where will that collection be? It'll be 1 out of 5, which we would place over here. So here's 1 out of 5. And then when I finally say Atlantic Ocean, we pop up there, right? So the movement from either a higher level of probability up to an actuality, or from the maximal amount of possibilities to an actuality, is, if you're a fly on the wall, that's called energy flow. That's what energy flow is. For a quantum physicist, they would map this out in a 3-dimensional way and make it how many things are happening all at once. We'll just call that diversity. We're not going to worry about it, but it just makes this a 3-dimensional graph. This then becomes, on our graph, called the plane of possibility. For a physicist, it's the mathematical space that Arthur Zions likes to call the sea of potential, and other physicists would call the quantum vacuum. Now, what is that place? This is the formless source of all form. And it is from this place of potential energy that actualities arise. So if you then take that view of energy from physics and say, whoa, how does this map onto the wheel of awareness? You get this kind of thing. You say, sometimes you go straight up from the plane of possibility to a peak. Sometimes you end up in what's called a plateau. And then you get this thing that looks like this. And this is the suggestion on what the mind is. That a thought or an emotion or a memory is when energy is moved to an actuality. The process of thinking or remembering or emoting is when you're at a sub-peak value. A state of mind would be a plateau. And then, let's see if I have it here, you get this possibility, that all the stuff on the rim are plateaus and peaks, and that the hub is the plane of possibility. And just to go back to that, so it looks like this, that this is where awareness comes from. Now, the reason this becomes really, really exciting is because it completely maps onto the Wheel of Awareness survey. And you go, well, I don't really see that. Tell me more about that. Well, how does it map onto it? This is the bizarre thing. Now, how many of you know that in physics, it's been established, not even just proposed, but established, that just like when you go, how many of you can swim? And you swim, yeah, okay. You know when you do the breaststroke, sometimes you're underwater, and then sometimes you lift your head up and you're in the air, and then sometimes you go underwater? Those are called 2 realms. There's a water realm, and there's an air realm. And when you swim, you experience both. The properties in water are different from the properties in air, right? It's different realms. It turns out, and this was the cover story of Scientific American, a month before the book Aware, which lets you explore all this stuff, came out. This was the cover story. Where do these two realms meet? And it was in a fascinating article, but what are the two realms? The two realms are these realms. One is the one 350 years ago Newton discovered, looking at large macro states like planets or apples. And the other, which has very different mathematical equations that are equally, in fact, they're more accurate than Newtonian ones, but they just don't apply in the microstate realm of an electron or a photon. It turns out that the realm of microstates, the quantum realm, has very different properties. Now, what are those properties? Here they are. In the quantum realm, we cannot find any nouns. There are no entities. There are no objects. There are just events, what are called probability fields. And there's no time. There's an arrow of time, a directionality of change, only in the Newtonian realm. And in this microstate realm, as has been established as of 2015, there's all sorts of studies I can tell you about from physics, but things are massively interconnected. But in the Newtonian realm, there is an arrow-bound unfolding of change at chronological time, and there's an appearance of things being noun-like entities that, of course, interact with each other, but they're separate. Now, what's fascinating about this is when people drop into the hub, they're describing the subjective experience of one realm that we live in. But when they're up in thoughts, the thoughts come and go with an arrow-bound thing of time. But there are implications, and the one I want to share with you about if this proposal is true, and just because it's consistent with physics, which my physics colleagues tell me it is, doesn't mean it applies to the mind, as my neuroscience colleagues always remind me very vociferously. They're very upset that I go to physics to explain this. However, I was teaching recently with Antonio Damasio, who thought going to quantum physics, in quote, was a brilliant idea to do it. And he's one of the most quoted neuroscientists on the planet. So I felt good about that. It wasn't necessary, but it was a good feeling. Here's what I want to tell you in short for the pathways to planetary health. When someone did the wheel, and she lives near Isaac Newton's house, so I went to England, and we did the wheel of awareness around the apple tree where Newton figured out the thing of gravity. And as we're doing it, part of what we reflected on was how modern culture, since the Renaissance, has been embedded in a Newtonian belief about the nature of reality. That's getting reinforced by society, reinforced by science, reinforced by schools, reinforced by parents, so that in attachment, in modern culture, not Western, we can only say modern, in modern culture, we're taught that we're noun-like separate entities. But when you're a child, you know that's not the whole truth, but it's taught out of you. The reality of interconnection you experience in the hub. How many of you felt that today when you got into the hub, you could feel the interconnections? Did anyone raise your hand really, really high so we can see? Okay, so it's about half. Now, I did this in Seattle once. A Microsoft engineer, no meditation, no therapy history, 70 years old, just retired, had this experience where he realized as he went out to the park after he was in the hub that he is the bird, he is the butterfly, he is the water, he's the rocks in the stream, that it's all him. He's everything and everything is him. Now, this view suggests then that in modern culture, what you get as a self-construal is a Newtonian perspective on the nature of reality. Newtonian is right. I mean, if you're driving a car home tonight, I'm going to tell you, take your Newtonian foot in your Newtonian car. When you get to a Newtonian red light, press on the brakes. Because if you don't and think I'm going to hang out in the hub and be in the wheel of awareness situation where I'm just in the plane of possibility, you will become one with everything in the intersection. So you need the Newtonian. No one's saying just bliss out all the time in the hub. However, if you start doing a practice, it doesn't have to be this practice, but for me, that's this. Every day, I get to drop into the realm of interconnection. And then it stays with me the whole day. So you can have a Newtonian thought, and you can drop into a quantum interconnected verb-like awareness that, and here's how I'll leave this with you, as you do your important work for planetary health, and all the difficulties you have, not just with the climate, but with political issues and economic issues, issues of racism, misogyny, all the things that you know are not integrative, they're not promoting well-being. And you feel the suffering in that. You need a place that will be your sanctuary. And I can tell you for myself, with all the things that have been happening in our world, having access to the hub of that wheel, to the plane of possibility, whatever is going on is an opportunity to drop into this love, interconnection, and awareness. Those three things in the survey are like the fabric of reality. Interconnection, love, and awareness from the survey look like people who drop into feeling the fundamental fabric of who we really are. So the simple way to remember this in terms of self-identity and belonging is that we have excessively differentiated the rim from the hub. We've excessively differentiated Newtonian from quantum. We've essentially made ourselves entities, noun-like entities of separation, instead of verb-like events of interconnection, right? So then you say, well, how am I going to remember that? How am I going to remember that? What it's done is it's made us treat Earth as a spherical trash can because the Earth is separate from us. And even in the languaging we use, we make it separate rather than actually a part of our body. We need to raise children, adolescents, and ourselves back to this reality. So one simple way that we can do it is to say, your me is there. You have a body. It's an inner mind. It's within. There's a dominant Newtonian quality to it. Fine. It only gets about 100 years of life. Fine. It's got an arrow of time. Fine. No one's trying to deny that. That's the me, the differentiated Newtonian reality. Great. Enjoy your body. But you have a we that's equally real. Just you forget about it. You're not taught to be a systems thinker. You're just into this linear thinking because you went to school. And the we as an intermind that's between, it's relational, has elements of this quantum that correlate with it. And it's a verb-like set of interconnected events that you don't own. You let things happen rather than make things happen. You participate things with rather than owning them. Even our languaging of trying to manage the environment, you know, as you told us earlier, the environmental management is like you own it, like you're separate from it. That's a Newtonian approach. So we need to find a way to have both, because you need to have both in the world. And the simplest way, there it is, of doing it is what you can simply call an integrated identity. Me is the Newtonian, we is this, if you don't like the word quantum, just call it relational. You've got this inner embodied, and you have this relational. You're both. Kids are not raised that way. Adolescents forget it too. When we can bring this together, we can create a compassionate, kind, and regenerative world. That is something I think we are ready to do. And this simple word, as simple as it sounds, when you get people's response, when they take the microphone, and they realize, I don't have to choose between me or we. I can actually be both. That's where kindness and compassion become as natural for the mind, this integrated identity, as breathing is for the body. And together, we can help this planet breathe in this integrated way, all of us together. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you.